Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
Well, hello again. Welcome. Appreciate your time here. It is episode number 26 of Weather Weekly. Glad to be with you. Glad you could join us here on this early August week here. And hey, finally getting some rain. It was good to see some rain across much of central Indiana here early on in the week. I am your host, meteorologist Marcus Bailey from Storm Track 8 Wish TV in Indianapolis. And again, it's always a pleasure to have you join us here on this weekly podcast. I want to get to some headlines here first, and the headline is, first and foremost, the rain that we finally got here started things off on Monday. Not real heavy rain, but it was consistent, and it was something. And what was notable about this, and we're recording this on this Monday, is that we picked up measurable rain since the first time in August, since the 1st of August. And we only picked up a few hundredths of an inch then. And there were many areas that picked up rain that was over a tenth of an inch for the first time since July 16th, so the middle of the month. So we've gone nearly, 3 weeks without really any significant rain. In fact, when I checked Monday morning on the 9th, since basically July 16th all the way to August 9th, we had a whopping 7/100ths of an inch of rainfall in Indianapolis. So that's pretty abysmal. And as a result, there's a lot of things drying out. I know personally my lawn has now kind of gone brown, and it's pretty crunchy, so this rain was a welcome sight, and some more rain chances here through this week, which we'll get in the extended forecast here coming up at the end of the podcast. So that's kind of the local headline here. Did have a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings on Saturday evening. Most of those were in far eastern counties of Indiana. Sparked some gusty winds, some larger hail. Didn't see any real significant reports, but just a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings for out in Wayne County and Randolph County. So that's impacting communities like Richmond and Winchester there in east central Indiana, riding along the Ohio border. I did get a weather watch report of over 1.5 inches of rain out of that thunderstorm, and up to, I think it was pea-size hail. So that's below severe thunderstorm criteria. Excuse me. But yeah, I mean, there was at least some areas that did pick up on a little bit of activity here. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think next week's podcast is going to focus on this subject matter, but I think it's important to just bring up, because it can be a talker, that the Old Farmer's Almanac did come out with their 2021-2022 winter outlook. And like I said, I'm not going to get too deep into that. I kind of want to just preview and say, hey, this is something we're going to be talking about heading into next week. And we're not going to mesh it together with our forecast. I think it's way too early. I think AccuWeather.com came out with a little bit of their fall forecast here, which is going to kind of play. I want to bring their discussion into it too. Because they both make the mentions of La Nina winters, which I think I brought this up several podcasts ago, and that forecast was coming on that we're likely going to be dealing with a La Nina winter, which typically means that we have an active winter, but it's a little bit warmer, it's more wet. And that's not the case every time. And we will have like kind of the official central Indiana winter weather forecast much later here in the season with Mike Ryan, as we typically do. We did it last year he was pretty spot on the forecast for central Indiana when it came to snowfall. Pretty close on temperatures too. So we'll have his forecast, but that's still several weeks away here, usually well into the fall when we start kind of talking about the winter weather forecast officially from the Weather Service. But did want to give a preview of that. That we're going to be dealing with in the next podcast, the Farmer's Almanac, because I know we get a lot of people that still, they like to know what's going on in the Farmer's Almanac. We'll talk about kind of the accuracy of the Almanac, and we'll bring up this AccuWeather article too, the fall forecast for 2021. And kind of how they coincide and all that kind of stuff. So that'll be next week's podcast, so make sure you stay tuned with that. I think it's also good just to kind of give you a preview of what's coming down the pipe. So next week we'll talk about the almanac. The week after that will be the week of August 23rd. And that will be the week that's a 5-year anniversary of the last really significant tornado outbreak that we've had in central Indiana. And that one was kind of a fluke. If you remember, we had several tornadoes that formed across central Indiana. One did pretty significant damages in parts of Kokomo. I think we all remember the photo from that day of the Starbucks getting leveled in Kokomo. I have my own personal story. I've been at Wish now for over 6 years, and that was by far my longest long-form severe weather coverage, I think probably my entire career, but certainly at Wish. I think we were on for 10 hours, 11 hours straight. It was a long day. So my coworker, Stephen Deanna, he's been on several of our podcasts. He's going to be joining me, just kind of looking at the perspective of that day, and I'll be kind of talking about how that day went in the studio there. It's still very fresh in my memory, even though it was 5 years ago. That was really the last long form coverage that I've had to do in my time here in Indianapolis. So, I mean, I guess that's a good thing. Hopefully I'm not rusty when the time comes that we may have to do it again. But it also goes to show that, yeah, I mean, we've had our bouts of severe weather. We've had some tornadoes here and there, and we broke into coverage, but nothing like that day. Nothing. That was a long day. So that will be 2 weeks from now as we approach the 5-year anniversary mark on that. So just kind of a quick programming note for you, what's coming down the pipe here over the next couple of weeks. Other weather-related things, pretty significant flooding that took place out in the Central Plains with this same storm complex that's basically impacting the Midwest here over the next several days. That's all kind of pulled away now. And then the other thing that we're kind of looking for after it has been extremely quiet over the last, it's been very quiet over the last really month in the tropics. It does appear that we may be seeing some action going on right now. We do have a system not classified, and again, I'm recording this on Sundays or on Mondays, so by the time this podcast drops on Wednesday, that things may be changing, but it does look like we have a system that's trying to get its act together. There's actually a couple of systems here. As of 2 p.m. Monday, August 9th, there's an 80% chance of organization of a cyclone in the next 48 hours, and this is just east of the Lesser Antilles there. So likely going to be seeing something develop there. There's no official forecast track of where that could be going. But something to watch for from some of the tracks that I've seen, at least from the models, by late in the week, maybe into the weekend. This is something that could be rolling closer to the Gulf of Mexico. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as we start rolling through the next week. So after a very quiet kind of last month to month and a half in the tropics, things are going to start ramping up fairly quickly here. So those are the quick headlines that have made their way through the weather world. So we'll keep an eye on some of those things that are going on. Coming up, I kind of, and I'll tell more of the story after we get past the break, but a couple of times I was thinking, what in the world am I going to talk about this week? I mean, it's just been so, quiet, and we don't want to just kind of be like, oh, it's dry. Here's how dry it's been. So a couple of things kind of popped up to my attention, watching TV or reading articles or whatever, not really actively searching for anything. But then it kind of just jumped out at me. I was like, wow, this might be a good podcast discussion. And that is the term wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb temperature. It's something that you will never hear come out of my mouth on television, unless I'm asking to get fired. It's not something that it's not common knowledge, right? So if the general public doesn't exactly know what it means, it's not something we're going to be bringing up on TV, but it is a useful tool, and I think it's getting a little bit more play now. And it does have an impact on, it may have an impact on how you kind of view the weather and stuff like that. So we're going to talk more about that, what it means, why it's important. That's coming up next here on Weather Weekly.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Welcome back, episode number 26 of Weather Weekly. It's good to be with you here. So I got an interesting one here for you, and it may be a term that many of you have not heard of, and that's what kind of like sparked my thought process and wanting to do a quick podcast about this. I don't know if I can milk this for, a half hour long. This might be a quicker one here, but I thought it was interesting. And so in the last week, I'm always kind of just searching for something that I want to do for the podcast. Some subject matter, somebody to interview, whatever. And I was struggling this week because I'm at a point now where I feel like, and I guess it's kind of the same way when you're doing weather on TV. When you're in a pattern, it's like, how many different ways can you say the same thing? It's going to be sunny, it's beautiful, it's high of 80, low humidity, et cetera, et cetera. That was basically my last, 10 days. Even in the summer, it's going to be hot, it's going to be humid, we'll have pop-up thunderstorm chances. So I didn't want to keep kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again here. And so I'm just thinking, I'm like, what in the world am I going to talk about? And I came across an article, I believe it was in the Washington Post. They have a group of meteorologists that work at the Post called Capital Weather Gang that I follow on Twitter. And they put out great content. And I kind of skimmed over it. I remember seeing wet bulb temperature or wet bulb globe temperature. Okay. I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and I know what that is. I mean, we had to deal with that when we were in school, and it's not something. There's a lot of things that we talked about in school that I never bring up on television because we're always told keep it simple. People don't want to know all the excess terminology. They just want to know what's the forecast going to be today, tonight, tomorrow, and the next 8 days, right? But then I realized, hey, I've got a podcast. This is where you can kind of nerd out a little bit. And so I kind of stuck in the back of my mind. I was like, I don't know, a whole podcast on wet bulb temperature. I don't know. But then, so my wife and I believe it was Saturday, or it might have been, I can't remember what day it was now. I think it might have been Friday evening, the last week of the Olympics. So the last Friday of the Olympics in Japan. And we usually just kind of sat and watched whatever they were kind of, bouncing around to. And they happened to be doing the women's marathon. And they were like just starting, and they ended up tossing to one of their reporters. I don't think he was a meteorologist. I think he was just a sports reporter. And they were in like I can't remember what town they were in. but it was in like far northern parts of Japan. It was like some 500 miles away from Tokyo, which is where the majority of the events were taking place. And they said that this wasn't the original spot that they were going to host this marathon because they moved it farther north in hopes of, having more comfortable temperatures for the runners to run the 23 some miles, 24 miles or whatever. 26. Was it 26.2? Sorry, I'm not a marathon runner. I know it's 20-something. We ended up watching the whole thing because the coverage was fantastic, and there was a young lady from the United States ended up taking away the bronze from that. Anyway, to get to this week's podcast, they just kept talking about how hot it was, how hot it is, and everything over there is in Celsius, right? Because we're one of the few countries that will measure in Fahrenheit. So, he's using, this essentially like, the bank thermometers behind him. He's got a board, and I think it said like 25 or 27 degrees Celsius. It ended up equating to like, close to 80 or something like that, which I'm like, well, that's not that high. Where are they going to go with this? I mean, look, I'm running a marathon in any kind of heat is probably not fun, but they started talking about the humidity, and they didn't really focus on the heat index, which is what, we talk about a lot, on television, right? When it's going to be really, really muggy, we start talking about either we dub it feels like temperature or heat index, heat indices. The important takeaway is what it will feel like when you step outside, when you factor in the heat and humidity, right? That's the gold standard on television. I think that's what the general population kind of equates. But he started going in on this this is why this is important in terms of wet bulb temperature. And I'm like, you know what? That would be a good podcast episode. And it's interesting because just doing some research, I guess I didn't realize the amount of people that actually do look at the wet bulb globe temperature when it comes to working outside, which is important. So let me kind of walk you through exactly what it is, and then I want to kind of compare it to heat index, which is what many of you are accustomed to us talking about, okay? So this is the definition. I'm going to read this straight from the National Weather Service website, okay? Wet bulb globe temperature. Technically, it's not an operational use by our government, meaning it's not an operational use by the National Weather Service, okay? It's not a product that they officially put out. Okay, it is a measure of the heat stress in direct sunlight, which takes into account temperature, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, and cloud cover. Okay, so you've got a lot of things there. Temperature, 1, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, and cloud cover. There's 5 factors. Okay? If you work or exercise in direct sunlight, this is a good element to monitor. Military agencies, OSHA, and many nations use the WBGT, the wet bulb globe temperature, as a guide to managing workload in direct sunlight. Okay, so now we know one part of it. You've got many more elements that are in play here, right? If you really think about it, because I guess I should go ahead and mention this. What is heat index? Heat index is basically the combination of the air temperature and the dew point temperature. The air temperature and the dew point temperature. And that's where you end up getting your equation of what it feels like on the skin. But I think it's also important to know this, that heat index is actually not measured for direct sunlight. It is, here, I'll give you the straight definition from the Weather Service, okay? The heat index, also known as the apparent temperature, is what the temperature feels like to the human body when relative humidity is combined with air temperature. This has important considerations for the human's body's comfort. When the body gets too hot, it begins to perspire, sweat, and then cools itself off. If the perspiration is not able to evaporate, the body cannot regulate its temperature. Evaporation is a cooling process. When perspiration is evaporated off the body, it effectively reduces the body's temperature. When the atmospheric moisture content, i.e. the relative humidity, is high, the rate of evaporation from the body decreases. In other words, the human body feels warmer in humid conditions. The opposite is true when the relative humidity decreases because the rate of perspiration increases. The body actually feels cooler in arid conditions. There is a direct relationship between the air temperature and relative humidity and the heat index, meaning as the air temperature and relative humidity increase or decrease, the heat index increases or decreases. Okay? So it's basically a mathematical equation. And it's factoring in the air temperature, and I said the dew point, I apologize, it's the relative humidity, which that's another mathematical equation to how much moisture is in the air, which does factor in the dew point. So it actually does all correlate together, okay? But again, going back to the definition of the wet bulb globe temperature, it said, and I omitted this because I kind of wanted to come back, all right? So the definition was, it takes into account temperature, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, and cloud cover. This differs from the heat index, which takes into consideration temperature and humidity and is calculated for shady areas. Okay? So a lot of the reason why these companies, military agencies, OSHA, what are they doing? They're outside, and I would say more often than not, they're not in shady areas working, right? They're under a lot of sunlight. So you need to know kind of what that means, all right? Now, this is why it's something that we can't necessarily, at least at this time, bring up on television, because we're basically going to have to re-educate the public, all right? There are benefits to saying heat indices, right? You've got heat advisories when it meets a different threshold. I think here in Indianapolis, it's 105 is when you start getting the heat advisory criteria, right? But it's even a caution zone if you're in that 95 to 100 range. Compare that to, I'm going to read you kind of the, excuse me. So if you just do a Google search, wet bulb globe temperature weather service, you're going to go to this website, and it actually has a little calculator and sliders that you can play with, and you can change the temperature, and you can change the dew points, and then you can also change the wind speed and cloud cover, which is all going to play a role in your final product, which is going to show the heat index and the WBGT. Both are put in Fahrenheit. So I'm just playing around with it right now as I'm talking to you. So I'm going to go with a forecasted high of 95. We're going to go with a dew point of 71. Okay, so that's automatically going to adjust my relative humidity to 46%. I'm going to put a 3 mile per hour wind, and I'm going to put 10% cloud cover. So this is why the wet bulb temperature will likely never be used anytime soon on television to try to convey a message. Okay. So what I say, the forecast high temperature was 95, dew point 71. Heat index of 103. That shouldn't be surprising, right? Anytime you're above 60, it's considered, humid. When you're in the 70 dew point range and higher, it's oppressive humidity. So 103, you're kind of borderline heat advisory criteria with that max temperature of 95, and you don't have much of a wind to kind of kick things up. But again, remember, wind is not factored in for heat index. It's only the relative humidity and the forecast temperature, high temperature. The WBGT number is 88. So let me repeat that again. Max high temperature 95, dew point 71, heat index 103. The lowest number that I have is WBGT is 88. So that seems low, right? Well, here's where we would have to do like a re-educating of the public. And we've learned in broadcasting that a lot of the time, the vast majority of our viewing audience, all right, not you guys, you're listening to a weather podcast. So you are obviously interested in weather. But the vast majority of our viewing audience does not want to be educated. And they don't want to, I put that wrong. They don't want a lesson, okay? They want the forecast. They don't want a lesson, most of them, okay? I've heard that firsthand, and in some sense, I understand it. It doesn't mean that I wish it was different. I enjoy talking about, things that people may not have known and educating the public on that kind of stuff. But 3 minutes is valuable time, especially in the shift I work in the mornings. People don't want to, they're not watching me. They're listening to me, right? They're rushing around getting their kids ready. They're brushing their teeth. They're getting ready for work. They're not watching the TV. They are running around the house like crazy to get ready for the day. And so what they want to know is, what is it doing right now? What's it going to do while I'm driving to work? What's it going to do when I'm driving home from work? Do I need to water the flowers before I leave or when I get home? So that's a big reason why things like this that are not just commonly used and not already known about probably won't be anytime soon. Okay? So this is from, again, the Weather Service. They have a table, and I will explain this. So again, I want you to keep that number in mind of what I had. The wet bulb temperature, the wet bulb globe temperature was 88. Okay? So here's how this has been put out. Okay? So that wet bulb temperature in a range of 80 to 85. First, I should say anything below 80, no worries. Okay? No worries below 80. 80 to 85. Working or exercising in direct sunlight will stress your body after 45 minutes. 85 to 88. So that puts us in the range of what I did on that particular model. Working or exercising in direct sunlight will stress your body after 30 minutes. 88 to 90, also kind of in that range. Working or exercise in direct sunlight will stress your body after 20 minutes. And 90 or greater, working or exercise in direct sunlight will stress your body after 15 minutes. And basically, because, again, a lot of OSHA, has kind of mandated this for their outdoor workers. They've obviously got precautionary actions. Just in our example here, that number 88, I'll go on the higher end, that 88 to 90, it says take at least 40 minutes of breaks each hour if working or exercising in direct sunlight. Okay? And again, what I'm thinking about is, and I live in a part of the metro where it's just an immense amount of construction. And I mean, look, that goes on all over our state, really all over the country this time of year because it's warm. They can get the most amount of work done at this point. But this is what they have to worry about, right? This is what they have to worry about. They have the safety precautions. It's no different. I mean, this isn't treated any differently than when we say heat index stuff. Wear a hat, lightweight, light-fitting, light-colored clothing. Plan to take frequent breaks in shady areas. Drink plenty of water, non-alcoholic fluids. Don't get too much sun. So it's a different way of kind of presenting it. But I thought it was interesting because they use that why I like it more. Again, it's not something that I'm going to jump on board with and say, let's do it, because it's just not enough people. I'll go on air and I'll be like, yeah, there's the wet bulb temperature. They'll be like, what? What'd you call me? You can't do it. But I mean, especially in weather, there's so much more than just two elements that can tell a story. You get, the heat index with just the heat and the humidity. But if you have a 30 mile per hour wind, it's not going to feel like that, right? But that doesn't show when we are, we are broadcasting. Let me just put an example out here. I'm messing around with this slider here. So I'm not going to change anything except for this example. I'm not even going to go that high. I'm going to go to 15 mile per hour winds. I did not change the max high temperature. I didn't change the dew point, so the relative humidity is the same, and I didn't change the cloud cover. Our heat index, guess what? Was 103. It stays at 103. The wet bulb globe temperature was at 88, which kind of puts it on that higher end for caution, right? 40-minute break for every hour. To now down to an 84, which is on the lower end, and saying taking a 15-minute break each hour. That's a big deal, right? I mean, look, if you're under, guidelines from OSHA saying you got to do this, you got to know that kind of stuff then. You got to know how much cloud cover. Let me bring the winds back down. I'm going to put them down to 0. So I'm reset it back to 88. And I'm going to increase the cloud cover to 75%. Now, it doesn't do as much, but it did bring it down to 87. So that may make the difference between, say, a 40-minute, take at least 40 minutes of breaks each hour to 30 minutes. So you're gaining 10 minutes of work time per hour there. Got to know that stuff. So, when I thought about it, I'm like, well, why in the world are they doing that? But it does make sense because there is so much more in a lot of aspects of weather. It's not just the wet bulb temperature, but I think this is an excellent, maybe the best example of, where there are so many more elements that go into how we present what weather extremes we may be going through than just 2 elements when we should be factoring in 5 different elements. And maybe one day we start to get to, I think part of the reason right now that this isn't used is because that number is confusing. And I think if you get to a stage where you don't necessarily call it a wet bulb temperature, but maybe you get it in from like a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of risk, then that's something that you could use, right? Because again, not most of you, because most of you have at least some background or love for weather, or you wouldn't be listening to a weather podcast. But the average person, I think of someone like, any of my immediate family members. If I'm trying to explain this to them at the dinner table, I'm just going to get a glazed look and it's just going to blow over their head. But if I say, okay, look, on a scale of 1 to 5, do I think you should be outside for an extended amount of time? I'd say, okay, in that example where it's 95 and no wind and our humidity is at near 50%, I say it's at a 4. But if the winds are going to be at 20 miles per hour, say it's at a 1. That's probably a little bit easier for you to understand, right? I think that's where, and I think that goes to, and this is probably a conversation for another day, and maybe a conversation with someone that's much smarter than I am, that, a lot of things in the whole entire weather enterprise, warnings, advisories, just messaging in general, make it as simple as possible. Because that's the goal, right? Weather can be a very stressful thing. Whether it's heat, whether it's hurricanes, whether it's tornadoes, whether it's blizzards, whether it's flooding, anything in between. You need a concise, clear message and easy to understand. And I think the Weather Enterprise is getting better and better as we go along, because I think, in collaboration with, television meteorologists and how they communicate, and just, general surveys with the public and research with, social sciences type of thing, that, I think weather is catching up to that fact that you don't want to treat people like they're stupid, because they're not, right? But you also don't want to overcomplicate things. It's at the end of the day, when you're talking wet bulb globe temperature, is that going to make a huge difference as opposed to the heat index? No, probably not. I think it just is. It's for kind of a closing point to put the wraps up on all of this. Is it just goes to show that there's some really good things that the weather community has come up with, like this. It's just overly complicated right now. It helps for the people that know and are in charge, like the marathon at the Olympics, right? They're the ones that knew and said, okay, this is where we're at. We're probably going to need water stations here. I mean, I don't know enough about marathons, if there's like a set amount, or if they're allowed to have as many as they need, or what, based on the weather conditions. But I do know that they talked about that a lot, and that was a concern. Do I know that every runner is aware of that? No. And they probably don't need to be, but there's just a lot of really useful tools in the weather community that, as the years evolve, I'm hoping people can get in there and say, look, there's a better way. We can use all these equations, but there's a better way that we can, send this to the public and say, this is what this means, and this is why it's going to impact you. I have no idea how that's done. That's why I am a morning meteorologist at Wish TV and not trying to figure this out and let the smart people deal with it. So that was just kind of what was on my mind. Hopefully you found that interesting. Again, wet bulb globe temperatures. Again, if you want to check that out, and specifically, I'll give you the website here, weather.gov/TSA/WBGT. And that will take you to the wet bulb globe temperature site. I read you the direct definition right off of it, and it's got that slider on there to kind of show you what I was looking at. Okay, so check that out. I think it's interesting, and let me know your thoughts too, and what you think about all of this as well. All right, always appreciate your feedback. We'll have your week forecast coming up next here on Weather Weekly. All right, quick look at your forecast here for the week of August 9th, and it's still steamy here. Of course, this is dropping in the middle of the week, but I think we still have a couple more days of 90-degree heat, and we're likely going to have still some scattered showers and thunderstorms just because we still have a very unstable air mass and a lot of humidity out there, so you got to get these daily afternoon thunderstorm risks here, and some of those could be on the stronger side, very pulsy in nature as we go through your Wednesday, probably Thursday as well, and there may even be some isolated storms heading into Friday. So I've got low 90s through Thursday. I think we scale it back a little bit on Friday, back to the mid-80s, but I tell you what, there are signs that we're going to start seeing some cooler and drier air coming in here starting this weekend. And I see highs only in the low 80s, and dew point values should be close to 60, maybe even below that. If that holds true, that's going to make for a really nice weekend. And it's going to put us pretty close to where we had been, say, the week prior here, when we had that stretch of about 7 days that was just about as perfect as it can get for the middle of summer, early August. So that looks like it might be heading our way here as we start rolling through the weekend and beyond. 6 to 10 day outlook, though, does have us at least slightly above average in temperature, but below average in precipitation. So that's not good. Kind of at a point now where you get what you get here this week, and it may be a while before we get anything significant. And you go the next 8 to 14 days, so taking you 2 weeks out basically takes us to almost the end of the month, not quite. above average temperatures and below average precipitation. So not a lot of change. And again, we mentioned this last week on our podcast, talking about how kind of August rolls here. August is not an extremely wet month. So thankfully, we got a good amount of rain, especially in the month of July on the front end. So, I mean, droughts are not impossible. Especially when you heat up quickly, and we've had some hot days. We've been lucky that we've had some cooler days. When you have some hot days, it then can dry your soil out real fast. So hopefully we got enough this week here to wet your whistle a little bit, because it may be kind of slim pickings when it comes to any significant rain here over the long haul here for the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep an eye on that one as we start rolling on here through the middle of August, and hopefully you're having a fantastic summer. My thanks to you for checking out this week's podcast, episode number 26. We're just moving right along, and we always appreciate you and your taking the time to listen to these podcasts. And we love to hear your feedback as well. Shoot me an email, marcus.bailey@wishtv.com. You can also hit me up on social media, Marcus Bailey Weather on Facebook, and at Marcus Bailey on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Let me know the good, the bad, the ugly. Also, if you have any good suggestions or ideas for future podcast episodes, I'd love to hear those and take those into account. This is a weekly one. We're always searching for content here, and we're pretty open too, right? And it's good that the boss just kind of let us do our thing here, as long as it stays on topic, weather related or science related here. Earth science related, we're all about it. So shoot me an email or shoot me a message on social medias, and let's get to work here. We appreciate it. And again, appreciate your time. Hope to see you next week. Again, we'll be talking about the Farmer's Almanac and kind of giving an early preview of what they say, not what I say, on this upcoming winter season. And we'll kind of talk about how the accuracy rate is with the Farmer's Almanac as well. And then the week after that, it's the 5-year anniversary of the last significant tornado outbreak here in central Indiana. And that will be recapping those tornadoes that impacted several communities. Kokomo was one of the harder hit ones, also up in northeastern Indiana as well, with my guest, my coworker, meteorologist Stephen Deanna. Make sure you also check out all the fantastic podcasts that we have going on here on a daily basis on the All Indiana Podcast Network. We'll talk to you next week.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com, and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.